Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're going to be talking about my thoughts after having beaten Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So I've actually taken a little bit longer than I thought to come out with my thoughts here in this video. I beat the game actually a couple weeks ago, but things have gone the way. We got the Nintendo Direct, the Mario movie, so many other things I had to focus on, plus just my work life and all. But I'm finally getting to putting my thoughts into video form here on how I felt about this game. And, you know, after giving it a couple weeks, I've had more of an opportunity to process and ruminate upon what I experienced of this game. And I'll just tell you right off the bat, my thoughts on the game are positive. I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a great game, and it's definitely in contention for the best RPG of the year. It's a very, very good game. But how good? How does it compare to the previous Xenoblade games? Where are its strengths? Where are its weaknesses? That's what we'll be talking about today. Now before I jump to things, let me first very quickly mention my social media. You will see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It's linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe if you haven't already, or perhaps consider joining as a member. So first, let me warn you, yes, this video will have some spoilers because I'm going to be talking about my overall experience of the game, and the very end of the game will be mentioned, it will be discussed, so you have been warned. But before we get to my thoughts on the end of the game, I want to talk about my overall experience here. Because, yes, I enjoyed the story very much. I thought it was a strong, powerful story, and spoiler, I cried at the end. A little bit. As I tend to do with every Xenoblade game, just for the record. I felt it was powerful, but I am under some debate as to how powerful it was. Because when I think about Xenoblade Chronicles 3, when I compare it to previous Xenoblade games, I feel that those stories left a lasting and strong impact on me, and I'm not quite sure how much of an impression Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is going to leave on me quite yet. Something that I've realized after thinking about it is that I played Xenoblade Chronicles 3 more than 1 and 2 on my initial playthroughs. I took more time with this game than those previous games. I took more time to explore the world. And let me tell you, the world is incredible. I continuously found more and more secrets and more areas that I didn't think would be there. This world, while it may seem large, is even larger than you think. There are a lot of areas that are secret that you will not find, that are not mandatory, but are there. And there's actually, if you pay attention to the environment and the backgrounds, you can spot certain areas that you may think, oh, can I get there at one point or another? And oftentimes, you can't. Not entirely, it's not a fully open world game, but there are a lot of areas where, yep, you can get there. At some point or another, you can. And that experience is very, very satisfying. I remember in the beginning parts of the game, I saw like this, there's like some sort of destroyed Titan in the beginning of the game, and I theorized that it might be the remains of Gormott from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I even thought maybe we can somehow get up there. And spoiler, yes, you can eventually get up there, and actually that is where Nia, one of the two queens, the queen from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, someone who's from Gormott initially, can be found. It was subtle how it was done, but when you think on it, and if you're a fan of 2, well, it's satisfying once you realize the connection there, and that's lovely. And the worlds are truly beautiful. There is variety, there is scope, there are secrets alluding to previous times and different areas from the different Xenoblade games, exploring the Orion Titan, again, seeing the Orion ruins, seeing the city from before, seeing the Mechonis sword, getting up and close and personal, going through the Air Sea and seeing how it's changed after all these years. It's an experience, and it's definitely more satisfying if you've played through 1 and 2. But something I've sort of debated is, while this world is beautiful and grand in scope and tons of secrets to find, its exoticism, the variations of the environments, seem to be a little bit lesser or more on the realistic side compared to 1 and 2. Something I enjoy about the Xenoblade series. Even X actually has some pretty crazy environments. 3 seems to be a little bit more tame. Things seem to look a little bit more natural. It's a different direction. So while I still had moments where I was filled with awe, when I was able to climb up the Mechonis hand, or when I was able to get to the top of what I believe to be the remains of Gormott, it's cool. It's amazing to see the world from very high up in these places that you didn't think you could get to see the Urian Titan close up, to get to the particular different castles that are hidden throughout the world. These moments are spectacular, and there are some incredible scenes. But still, when compared to some of the previous games, the overall sentiment I have is that the previous games were more extreme in terms of what we saw from the environments. This one seems more on the realistic side. But with this more realistic world came a more believable world. So what I mean is, there are many colonies throughout this environment. There are a few castles and cities. There are enough places hidden throughout this world to explain for each character and where they may come from. Too often in a lot of other games, including Xenoblade games, other characters may make reference to other provinces or cities or towns in the game that you can never actually go to. A great example is Gormott. On multiple occasions in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's referenced that Gormott has varying civilizations and people, but there's really just one big city there. But in 3, while there are references to different peoples and civilizations, you can find them in 3. And in each city or colony there are buildings or tents that account for the people that would be living and sleeping there. So for many that may not seem like a significant detail, but for me it matters. Why? Because it adds to my immersion. It's easier for me to believe that this is an actual world that people can be living in. And I think that should stand for something, right? So while you can make the argument that the world itself is perhaps not as exotic as 1 and 2, it's more immersive, it's more believable, it's more connected, and I think that does go a long way. But a common criticism amongst many games with large worlds to explore is that they may feel empty and there's not really much to do in them. I don't really feel like that's an issue for 3. There are tons of items to find, there are camps spread throughout, so in these camps you can take a break, you can build gems, you can level up, you can cook or have dialogues that open up more side quests for your party. There's a lot of different things you can do with those camps, but then there's also these areas you can open up where there will be Nopon that will gather. There are tons of enemies to explore and find. There are secret areas that have sometimes different puzzles or things you can do, and littered throughout the map there are events that you can find that will lead to another side quest, and they can come with their own cutscenes and story that you would never have expected. And yet the world is still beautiful and fun to explore in and of itself, so there's so much to do here. But let's now move on to the combat. And I'm not going to make a full-on combat analysis for this video, but I will say that the combat here is pretty much par for the course for previous Xenoblade games. It's a relatively new system with a lot of new mechanics that build up over time that give you a thrilling and engaging and deep experience. If you get into it, there's a lot that can be found here, and ultimately it leads to putting together really powerful, insanely high numbered chain attacks that completely decimate your enemies. The game can be hard. There are varying difficulties. I switch between normal and hard throughout my experience. Normal sometimes was challenging, but after doing enough quests and leveling up, I switched to hard, and there were times where I was way over leveled and still got my butt whooped. So there's tons of challenge in this game, and the combat has a lot of room for growth and mastery, and there are so many different things you can do. Something that I think speaks really well for the combat system in 3 compared to previous Xenoblade games, at least for me, is that in previous Xenoblade games, I'll try out a few different things throughout my experience as they introduce different characters, but ultimately I will settle on a particular set and band of characters, and everything else is pretty much going to be ignored unless they just straight up see a way to just outright put up better numbers in terms of moves or armor. When it comes to 3, the way the game is designed, I was continuously changing my classes, trying different things, trying different combinations, especially when you do these different hero quests that are really fun side quests, and I did them all. you unlock a different class, and it gives you more options that you can do in combat and mix things up. And over time, you get your different party members to obtain that class, and they obtain different arts that they can mix up and do different things, and the combinations continue to grow and grow and grow. So there's a lot of options and a lot of variety there, and I played around with this throughout my entire experience of the game. Ultimately, did I settle on something? Yes, I did, and it's kind of basic. Basically, it came down to me just supporting Noah with his super awesome power-up that he obtained later into the game, because it's a really cool combination, but there's still so much you can do with the other party members and even his base class as well. So there's still a lot of variety there, still a lot of things to mix up, and I'm not even done with the game per se. There's post-game, there's DLC coming, and there's more reason to go back to it, explore, and try out different things, not even counting New Game Plus. So there's tons of reason to revisit this game and continue to enjoy it. I know that if I go back to the game, I will have a good time exploring this world, finding more characters, finding more things to do, beating other bosses, mastering even more of the combat system. It's a good time. But that brings me to probably the biggest conversational point of this video, and that's the story. As I said, I did more with the combat, more with the hero quest, the side quests, and did more exploring of this world than I did for any previous Xenoblade game. So with that all in mind, you would think that I would outright think that this is the best Xenoblade game yet. But I'm not 100% certain, because I don't know entirely how I feel about the story. I am not saying the story is bad. On the contrary, I am saying it's good. And I think from a voice casting perspective, this story is blatantly better than 2 and better than 1 as well. But the events and how they all come together and how I felt about the overall experience, that's what I'm still debating here. Because while the story I think is still objectively good, because of the other elements, because the way the game is constructed in terms of finding different colonies and exploring different parts of the world and doing the side quests and the hero quests, you will find yourself not necessarily blitzing through the story. And I'm sure different people play the game in different ways. There were times when I just took a lot of time just to explore the world and enjoy it, and there were others where I would blitz a story. I would do it in waves. But because of that, I find myself sometimes going days or even a week or two without really progressing the main story. So as a result, I do think a bit of my immersion with that story was dampened, was lessened somewhat. It's a little bit dulled. That's enough synonyms there. Point is, because the way the game is constructed and it encourages me to explore more of the world and the side questing and the combat system, I wasn't as engaged with the story as I have been for previous games. But it's one of those things where it seems like it has to be one or the other. You can't fully do both, even though they tried, because as you explore with the world, there are many side quests, the hero quests, which I think are the best side quests I've seen from any Xenoblade game, because they add more to the story. They are complementary pieces to the story. You learn more about the characters involved, and that's great. So you can make the argument that while the main exact story itself I wasn't as engaged as I was with previous games, I was given more time to fall in love with the characters and the world and what they're dealing with. And that I enjoyed. But to be fully critical, I'll also say that the themes they were going for, they aren't super deep, I would say. It got to the point where, okay, I've seen this concept before, we get it. You guys are sort of just thinking about, man, people are suffering, this sucks, what can we do to save them? Are we doing the right thing? That kind of concept is prevalent throughout the entire time. Yes, there are curveballs thrown in because there are certain characters they thought they were good and turned out to be bad, but that may be good at the end. The best example that comes to mind is Joran. Joran is a character that we thought died at the beginning of the game. It was very sad, and it's something that plagued our main cast. But then they find that somehow he is alive again, and now he's evil, doing evil things, or at least working for the other side. So there's definitely a debate of what's going on there. They thought of him as good, but now he's evil. What led to this? What caused this? And eventually we do see what led to that, and it had to do with his demons and his sufferings, and it is also related to why he made the decision he did that caused him to die early on in the story of the game. But he does eventually get his redemption as well. So there are character arcs going beyond just the main cast, And you do have moments where you question the decisions of these characters, but you ultimately learn why they did what they did. And while you may not always agree with it, it does make sense. So there are powerful character arcs here. But I also can see how some people playing through the game may not find it as impressionable because the concepts aren't like extremely deep to go way over the top across the board all the time. But there's enough of a mix-up, I think, where it's still ultimately interesting and enjoyable throughout the entire experience. But now let's get to how everything comes together at the end. Because as I said, because the way I played through the game, my engagement with the story was on and off, the main part of the story, but it still ultimately felt fine because I was learning more about the world and the characters as I did all the side quests. But when it came down to the end, and we saw things concluded, this is how I feel. I don't think the antagonist is great. I'm referring to Zed. Zed is okay, because Zed ultimately is a culmination of the fears and inhibitions of people. So it's more of a symbolic fight. It still has a physical entity and it's still opposing, but it's not like, for example, let's say Ocarina of Time, which is one of my favorite final fights in video games. In The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, you have this final battle with Ganondorf. But what's fascinating about this battle is that it's an antagonist that you interact with throughout the entire game. There's a give and take. There is an opposing force that sends you down multiple times throughout. There's a connection there. And at the end, there is meaning behind that battle to save Zelda. You want to save her. And there's multiple waves, and it's a bit of a roller coaster, and it's ultimately very epic. Yes, there are multiple waves with Zed. Yes, we know of him throughout the game, but there isn't like a direct connection or relationship between the main characters and this villain. So there are a few points I take away from fighting Zed. That said, in comparison to the final fight in 2, while we did have more of a relationship with Malos, at least in terms of the way the fight is done, it's not as frustrating or annoying. So that goes well, but that has more to do with the gameplay and the combat, which I think across the board are better than 2 or 1, or even X. But the other antagonists, some of the other Mobius members, such as Joran, that's great. There are some good ones, there are other ones that are a little cringe, but you know, ultimately they're pretty fun. But the main one, N, that one was great to see. Seeing how he was also Noah, seeing how Noah, our main character, had his downfall and how that led to who he became as N, and seeing his reaction to the loss of his M, his Mio, that was crazy stuff. That was a powerful, powerful moment. Seeing how we lost certain characters like Ethel, for example, that was a powerful moment. So there is loss throughout this game, there are powerful moments throughout this game, there are strong characters, there are impactful relationships. It's good. And we see a lot of these characters come together at the end, and it's a proper emotional send-off. I appreciate all that. I do think the antagonist could have been better though. I wish there was a little bit more of a relationship there, more of a build-up there. But the very end of the game, how it all comes together, this problem of the two worlds merging, and how it could lead to a grand destruction, and what ends up happening, how the worlds actually start to drift apart again, and these 6 friends, 3 from one side, 3 from another, how they came together, opposing sides, wanting to kill each other in the beginning, now loving each other, most of which are implied to be romantic, and they're being pulled apart. Seeing that moment, that was powerful. Everything up to that point at the end was fine, but once I saw the worlds being pulled apart, once I saw that they weren't going to be able to live out their lives together after playing through the entire game, getting to learn more and more about these characters, and seeing their relationships build over time together, that was strong, that was powerful, that was sad. I was sad about it. I teared up. I didn't want it to happen, but it made sense. This was just what needed to be done for the world to return to, or the world to return to safety, so they can move forward and leave the endless now, but push towards the future. Of course, they make allusions towards a future where they may find each other again, and that's exciting. There's a mystery behind that. Could we see something in the future? Maybe in DLC. Maybe there'll be an epilogue story, or maybe this could tie into Xenoblade 4. If I had to guess, I would say an epilogue story. But the way things close out at the very, very end, I found that to be the most satisfying. They have this scene where Noah and friends return back to when they were kids in this castle-like town that we couldn't fully really explore throughout the main part of the game. And we see this clock, and it resumes back to time, and we see the horizon of the planet from beforehand, and all of a sudden, the beginning cutscene of the game makes sense. This was something throughout the entire game we couldn't quite figure out. We never really got to explore that town. We never got to see why the kids were there. We never understood why Noah could see this planet beyond his city. And we never saw this clock. And all of a sudden it made sense because it wasn't a metaphor. It's saying that physically, literally happened. But the way it was done, the way it was presented, was very abstract at first. But once we see time resume at the end, it all comes together full circle. And that's exciting. That's cool how it all came together. A scene that I completely forgot about, that I thought was weird and didn't quite make sense, and I wanted to find answers for throughout the game. At the very end, once I thought it was all over, they answered and it was full circle. But it still left me with a hope for the future to find out what could happen next with our characters now if they ever meet their friends again. So ultimately, I will say that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is an incredible game. I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the definitive Xenoblade game to play. If you're thinking about getting into the series and you can only play one, play Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Although I'll also argue playing 1 and 2 would be great because it would enrich your experience of 3, because 3 makes so many allusions to different characters and areas from the previous games, so it does make it more impactful. But 3 has the best combat system because it encourages you to explore and experiment more and try out different things. The world is the most believable, it's very large with tons of things to explore. I found myself exploring it more than previous games, even though maybe it's a little bit lacking in the exotic elements. The quests are the best yet with the hero quest. There's so many cool cutscenes and things going on, leading to more areas to explore and towns to explore, and ultimately enriching the main story and characters of the game. And then the story, even though I found myself not blitzing through it like previous games, because I got to know the characters so well, the way it all came together at the end was impactful, and it resonates with me. It's leaving a lasting impression, and I'm looking forward to what they do with the DLC. So I do think as time passes, I will look fondly upon Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I will revisit it. I do plan on playing through the post-game and maybe eventually New Game Plus and the DLC. So it's a good time. It's an incredible game, and I'm just glad that I got to enjoy it a lot sooner than I thought I would. So that's awesome. But anyways, guys, those are my thoughts on Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.